and that they had access to the purest gospel. Now, of course, this was reflected that in changes Luther made, of course, throughout the Reformation. He changed the services into the native tongue of German instead of Latin. He emphasized his catechisms, which were, once again, available in German and meant for the farmer, the storekeeper, not the theologian. And in all of those things, and in that emphasis, Luther, as a reformer, did so to help people grow closer to God. It was out of very concrete care for the people around him, which shaped him as a reformer. Also, I should say that Luther was deeply committed to God's word. As I said, he had memorized all 150 Psalms. And I will simply say this, that Luther said at the Diet of Worms, and these are his words: "Unless I am convinced otherwise by evidence from Scripture or incontestable arguments, I remain bound by the Scripture I have put forward. As long as my conscience is captive to the Word of God, I neither can nor will recant, since it is neither safe nor right to act against conscience. God help me. Amen." Now that's in the face of trial and impending death. Those were Luther's words. Bound to the Scripture, Luther pushed in this deeply, deeply biblical faith. This all leads me to a picture of Luther as a theologian. And I could give you a lecture on Luther's theology. I've had that class at seminary, but instead of doing all of that, I'm actually just going to describe it in one aspect. I have heard Luther described, and I think this is accurate, I've heard Luther described as what's called an occasional theologian. Now that doesn't mean he was a theologian sometimes. That means that Luther as a theologian was responding to various occasions around him. His theology came out of the context he was in. Now this is in contrast to what would be a systematic theologian who sets up to logically set out the faith, and I think Luther was logical too. But his sermons were sermons for the people. His catechisms were catechisms meant to teach the people, and that's where Luther focused his work. His biblical commentaries on Romans and Galatians, which are incredibly influential in Lutheran theological circles. First and foremost, they are commentaries on a biblical text. So whatever Luther was doing with his theology, it was arising out of everyday life as he saw it by the people. And Luther, it can't be said enough, Luther was a prolific writer. Now, of course, I'm sure we've all heard that the Reformation was helped a great deal by the printing press, which it most certainly was. But I have in my bag, actually, with me today, a book I'm reading. It's Luther's Commentary on Galatians, which I mentioned. I have a 400-page book that covers the first 4 chapters of Galatians. Luther was a prolific writer. All of his works, or the American version of Luther's works, consists of 55 volumes. That'll fill up a bookshelf. And what's more, that's only what's been translated to English. And all of this, again, as an occasional theologian, much of this writing was pamphlets, small short documents which could go out and inform the average person in the pews, written in German that they could understand. Now this was, of course, helped out that Luther was good friends with the printers, who were also benefiting quite well, too, from publishing all of this. At his death, Luther was probably the best-selling author as well in the whole of Europe. And of course, when considering a person as a whole, it's impossible to do so without considering them as a friend and family member. And now I think we all know that Martin Luther, a former monk, married Catherine von Bora, who was a former nun. And for those of you who don't know, she escaped the monastery. She had to sneak out. And the way that she was smuggled out was a shipment of fish came in carrying fish in barrels. And when it left, it came out carrying nuns in those same barrels. So I cannot imagine a smellier way to leave the monastery. But I know Valentine's is past, but gentlemen, you might be able to save this one for next year, because I like this. And I think this sums up Luther's relationship with his wife quite well. Luther writes, "When I look at all of the women in the world, I find none of whom I could boast as I boast with joyful conscience of my own. This one God himself gave to me, and I know that he and all the angels are pleased when I hold fast to her in love and fidelity." Luther was a bit of a romantic. I mean, I think we often think of this brash personality, but quite often with his wife, Luther would write letters to her, and they often reflected that similar tone. And it should be said, Katie played no small part in the Reformation. Luther was, as I pointed out, quite busy, and to be honest, not quite good at managing his household. So when he married Katie, she did the finances. Their house at Luther's death was more like a hostel than it was their home. She brewed beer for the people who would stay there. She handled the money. She handled the Luther estate, thus giving Luther the time, the space, the freedom to only focus on what he did. And without her, I think the Reformation would be quite different, and Luther would have quite possibly died a very poor man. He did end up with 5 children, and I should note that 2 of them died in childhood. And from the recent biography I read, that affected Luther quite deeply. So, I mean, as any of us can imagine. And of course, that brings us to Luther not only as a family man, but as a friend. And as a friend, Luther was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he could be fiercely loyal, and people like Philip Melanchthon, who we might all know, to those types of friends who stuck with him throughout the Reformation, Martin Luther was fiercely loyal. We know Martin Luther, the brash personality, and that certainly came out if somebody attacked one of his friends. And so while you were in good graces with Luther, he would defend you to the end. However, there were several friendships which were broken off, mostly by Luther's doing, actually, because people had, what's a good way to say this? They had either criticized Martin Luther to a degree that he felt uncomfortable with, or even in the case of Martin Bucer, kind of took the Reformation to an extreme Luther could not approve of. And on those friendships, Luther turned and hightailed it fairly quickly. And in addition to all of this, Luther was a pastor. He was ordained a priest while in his time at the monastery.